I'm Andrea Lee Matthies, writer, photographer, and clairvoyant medium, and this is the Bold, Brave Woman Project. This podcast is a living, breathing unfolding of what it really means to step into our becoming. Born from the ashes of a failed YouTube channel, this weekly podcast brings you real, unfiltered moments of failure, of bravery, and of deep intuitive knowing so that you too can step into who you're becoming with even more trust and bravery. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome back to the Bold, Brave Woman Project. If you're listening to this intro, this is actually the second version of this episode that I've released for this podcast. And there's a really, really important reason why that is. When this podcast first started, which I introduced a little bit in the episode last week about the failed YouTube channel, that failed YouTube channel was kind of like the end of the story. And it was really important for me to record that episode and release that to get the podcast into the airwaves, really. But the full story of the Bold Brave Woman Project actually goes way back. You see, 2 years ago, I released my very first major podcast called Body Diaries. Body Diaries was this beautiful idea that I had to create a space where women could come and talk about the journeys that they've had with their bodies. Because as women, we don't often talk about the hardships or the things that we go through and the ideas and the relationships that we form with our bodies. And so I wanted to create this beautiful space for women to come to share their real and raw stories of what it's like for them being in a body and journeying through that. And Body Diaries was such a passion project and still is to this day. But what I realized through so many conversations with so many incredible women is that we're not always comfortable using our voices, or we're not always comfortable talking vulnerably about some of the things that we've been through. Like, it's really confronting and can trigger those states of shame and questioning about who we are, that I realized just having the space to speak wasn't enough. If women don't feel confident to even embrace their story and share it, Body Diaries can only go so far. And so about a year ago, I had this beautiful idea to create a podcast. At the time, it was called Bold with Andi Matthies. And so I started creating these episodes about stepping into our voice and, becoming the narrator of our lives and having the confidence and courage to really express ourselves in only the ways that we can, and allowing ourselves, giving ourselves the trust to back ourselves, to be able to speak and overcome fear. And at the time, I fell in love with this idea and I started recording these episodes all around voice. But I tripped into my own fear and my own second guessing and feeling like I have no place in being an expert in this space and nobody would want to listen to these episodes. And so the 10 episodes, I think it was, that I recorded, they just got shelved. I actually wrote a Substack piece about this last week. I'll link it in the show notes if you want to go back and read all about the full origin of this podcast. But when I was thinking about rebirthing and recreating this podcast, the Bold Brave Woman Project, I thought, I'm going to dig out those old episodes that I recorded and see if there are any that fit the theme of this beautiful new endeavor that are worth surfacing and sharing as part of this new version of the podcast. So this particular one that I released last week was one of the first episodes that I recorded as part of Bold and talks a lot about my own journey with my voice. But here's the thing. When I listened back to it, that original episode was recorded in such a different version of me. It was 12 months ago and so much has been uncovered, has been exposed, has broken down, has been rebuilt over the last 12 months. Especially, and I talk about this most recent breakdown and breakthrough that I've had in the last couple of weeks that is being shared in episode 3, which drops tomorrow. The energy of this original episode was more from a space of a teaching, sharing through story type energy. And whilst that's not wrong, absolutely it's not wrong. And at the time I was coaching women in stepping into self-expression as my niche. It's very different to the energy that I want this podcast to be in. And when I listened to it back after uploading it, I realized the tone, the vibe, and everything, it's so different. It is representative, yes, of a version of me, but a different version. And I thought it was very interesting because when I hit the upload button, I popped a little text-based post up on Facebook, which is not my normal channel. Usually I'll share through Threads or Substack or Instagram. But I popped this text up on Facebook and that was all I did. And I couldn't quite understand at the time, this time last week, why that was. Like, why is it that I'm only putting one little post up in a space that people are not used to connecting with me through? And I'm like, oh, I know what that is. It's because on an energetic level, I know that this represents an old piece, but I had kind of gotten trapped in that old energy of the sunk cost fallacy. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term. The sunk cost fallacy is where we invest so much time into something that we're too afraid to not extract value from that, or we're too afraid to waste all of that energy that we need to use it, or we need to do something with it. It's why we might invest in something and we realize that it's not really the right fit, or it's not doing the thing that we need it to do, but we keep pouring money into it, hoping, praying, and trying to extract value so that we don't look foolish for all the time, energy, investment that we've put into something. And so I feel like I had crept into that energy a little bit because I'm like, there's this beautiful, powerful episode that was meaningful at the time when I recorded it. It was the first time that I had spent, 35, 40 minutes just talking about myself and my journey through the lens of vulnerability and rawness, some of the lows and the highs that I had experienced in my journey of my voice. And I thought that's important to share. That is a milestone thing that I put so much effort into. I needed to share that as part of this podcast so that the time and the story didn't go to waste. And I thought about deleting it. Like this last couple of days, I'm like, do I just delete episode 2 and, relaunch with this new episode that's coming out tomorrow, which is more real time. It is more of the breakdowns and the breakthroughs and the realizations and the things going on in my life now, through that lens of the real-time becoming, what it looks like to walk through the questioning and the becoming as it happens, which is the promise of this new version of the episode. Maybe nobody's really listened to it anyway because I haven't been promoting it, and just pretend like it didn't happen. But I've decided not to, and that's why I wanted to record this little extra new introduction for this episode and keep it up there, because becoming is messy. Like, we don't always know what we're doing and we don't always do it right, but everything that we do on the journey is so valuable. And this episode in particular, it's showed me exactly what I do and I don't want this podcast to be. And so it belongs here because it is part of the becoming journey. It's part of my journey. It's part of this podcast's journey. And if I was to delete that just out of fear or of shame or of thinking, oh, I'm being inauthentic, or this isn't real time, this is an old version of me, or even just feeling ashamed of perhaps judging myself that the energy of the podcast is coming from a more space of, well, here's a topic I'm going to talk about through my story versus, hey, here's what's happening in my life and here's what I'm contemplating. I don't want to delete that because it's important. It's a piece of the story. I'm also acutely aware that removing it would also lean into perfectionism. That energy that we often have where we always want to curate or protect or project certain images or professionalism or status. And I thought, if I delete it, it's me giving in to that need to be perfect and to be polished. And I thought, oh, this episode needs to stay here just to show to myself, not to anybody else, to myself, that I'm not afraid or ashamed of who I was. I'm not ashamed of the things that I tried and failed or second guessed or judged or shelved and then fell into the sunk cost fallacy of, well, I should probably do something with this rather than it be a waste of all that time and energy. Because I spent months and hours and hours and hours putting energy into the first version of that podcast that I created, Bold with Andi Matthies, which got shelved and shut down. And then months and months later, that's when the idea of the YouTube channel, interviewing all of the female comedians, came in, and I went on that journey, and then that got shut down. I had that energy of, gosh, all of these failed projects, I need to do something with some of it. But I just didn't want that shame narrative to be there. And so I've decided to keep it here. And you can hear the difference. In fact, if you haven't listened to this episode yet, I would even encourage you to not listen to it until you hear the episode that comes out tomorrow, because that episode that's dropping in the morning was recorded just after a big breakdown, breakthrough. And I'm using those words interchangeably because I didn't have one without the other, but it was this big realization that I had sleepwalked into a life that wasn't mine. And that's a real time recording. That is something that's happening and that I'm leading myself through at the moment. And so if you wanted to, I would even listen to that episode so you can hear the difference in the energy to this episode here. This episode is such a beautiful moment in my life. You can just hear the difference. You can hear how far I've come in the last 12 months between then and now. And even now, I'm still in the middle of the becoming, and I will be for my entire life. But the energy is very different. I'll drop the links to the episode in the show notes so that you can get across to both of those. But it doesn't hurt us to show where we've come from. It doesn't hurt to show what we've realized, what we've walked ourselves through. We don't need to be afraid of that. I've lived my life with so much shame about the past that it's time to just let it be the beautiful experience and journey that it is. So please enjoy this episode as a glimpse through time, a glimpse back into an older version of myself, a different energy, a different time, as a little gift of a little piece of me. And if you want to let me know in the comments what you think, or if there have been times in your life where you've wanted to just, or you have erased the evidence of who you once were to avoid that feeling of shame, I'd love to hear from you, because this is such a normal thing that we do. But in this moment, I'm just choosing to allow it to be a beautiful piece of me. I hope you enjoy it. And here it is. Welcome back to the podcast. Today, I want to talk about identity and voice, because not all of us feel empowered to really speak. You know, quite often we have these really deep stories and experiences that we've had that are laced and laden with incredible insight, but there can be lots of layers of conditioning and fear over the top of that really prevents ourselves from speaking. And traditionally, women have not had empowered opportunities to be able to speak. If we look over the course of history, suppression of women's voices, women's rights, our ability to speak and really express ourselves has been stifled. Yet we are coming into this really incredible time now where there are so many more platforms and opportunities for us to be able to share our incredibly powerful stories. But sometimes what holds us back is still having this old conditioning that really prevents us from being able to not only speak, but really own who we are and own our power and have the courage to really step up and express ourselves just as we are. Because when we do share our stories, it creates these incredible ripple effects that have the ability to really change the world. And I really understand this because if I'm completely honest, I have been on a really difficult journey with my own voice and my own confidence. And it really wasn't that long ago where I struggled with being paralyzed and terrified to speak up and speak out and share my story. I look back at my journey, honestly, and it's crazy to think that I've gone from such crippling anxiety and hating how I sounded and being terrified of really putting myself out there, especially publicly, to now fully embracing my voice. And this is one of the reasons why talking about voice and how to really unlock it is so, so important because I truly, truly believe that all of us have these most incredible voices just waiting for that moment when we're brave enough to use them. And there are so many different ways in which we can use our voices. It could be something big like getting on a stage or being confident enough to be on social media, share your message with the world. Or it could be something simpler like having the confidence in your family dynamics or in your relationships to just finally say what's been on your mind or set those boundaries or say those things that you know that your soul has been craving to say, but it just hasn't had the confidence or willingness or freedom to be able to speak up. And a huge, huge part of this is not just about finding a voice and then getting really loud and speaking the words that you want to say. This is all about finding your voice, yes, but tapping into and remembering how confident you are, how powerful you are, how important your story and your journey to date has been. Quite often we feel like we have nothing of value to say, or our lives have been vanilla or simple, or we haven't been through enough tragedy or growth or expansion to have anything worthwhile to say. But honestly, this is not true at all. And when we realize that, it just cracks open this potential to expand into things in our lives that are beyond even our wildest dreams. It will have incredible ripple effects right across your life, more than just having a social media account or just being a performer on the stage. I've worked with so many women right across the world from all walks of life. Women who are just wanting to remember who they are and how incredible that they are so that they can tap into that confidence to open their voices and own who they are and love it in the process. And I've worked with other women who are performers and stand-up comedians and singer-songwriters who know they have stories and they want to be able to step into that magnetism, that confidence on stages or on other platforms and share their stories so that others who might be feeling alone or scared or forgotten about can hear their message and connect with them on that level of, oh my gosh, there's someone else who understands what I'm going through. There's someone else who gets this. And through sharing our stories and the things that worked, the things that didn't work, the trials, the tribulations, the celebrations, these are powerful in that they can go on and create these incredible ripple effects in the world and really create change, not just for ourselves, but for others around us. And I don't know about you, I am someone who really wants to get to the end of their life and look back and be like, that was for something. That was meaningful. I did something that helped, even just in a small way. For me, that's motivating other women, talking about voice, talking about confidence, talking about identity. I'm going to get into my story in a little bit, but I've had so many different incidences, both large and small, that have really rocked me and my identity, made me question who I am, what am I here for? Am I even any good at this? Nobody wants to hear this. I've had all of these different fears that I've had to navigate to get to this point now where I really understand the power of voice, the power of owning exactly who we are right now in this moment. And trust me, I have tried on so many different personalities, ways of showing up, ways of being. And honestly, it's so difficult energetically to try and constantly contort yourself to be something that you're not. And so really finally going, and saying, all right, Andi, this is who you are. This is what you've been through. Doing the work to really find that love for myself, that love for my life, even in the moments where it's hard and difficult and you're questioning everything, coming back to that sense of self-love and knowing that what I do is important and it has the potential to help and heal so I can get to the end of my life and know that it was all worth it. To kick us off, I thought it would be really helpful to give you a bit of context as to my journey with my voice and some of the things that I've had to overcome. And I have to say, it's been a real battle. As a young child, I really struggled to speak up. I was particularly terrified of anyone older than me or anyone who felt like they were in a position of authority or seniority to myself. And I really held back on voicing what I needed or how I felt. And I remember distinct memories, like being hungry and wanting to get something simple like a piece of cheese, but being so terrified of asking for it and potentially being rejected or being told no or being yelled at. And I had created these worlds in my mind where asking for something or speaking up felt super scary and was really difficult. So there was so many times where I would send in my little sister, who's 4.5 years younger than me and was such a beautiful, confident little girl. I would convince her that she also wanted a piece of cheese or something else from the fridge and that it was a really good idea that she should go and ask the adults or whoever it was that I deemed as authority over the cheese. And 9 out of 10 times, honestly, she'd go in there. She was super cute, so she'd be really cute and she'd say, oh, can I please have a piece of cheese? And I would be peeking out from behind the door frame, watching my little sister thinking, is she going to get it? Oh, she's asking, just completely living vicariously through her to get this piece of cheese. And 9 out of 10 times she'd get the cheese. Like it really wasn't a big deal. But in my little body, it was so terrifying. And I was so worried of the fear of rejection or being yelled at that I simply couldn't use my voice. Unless it was my mum or dad or someone that I was really familiar with, I couldn't speak up. I couldn't ask for anything that I needed. And while this is only one example, there were so many times over my young life where speaking up or asking for things was really difficult. And I know these early experiences of not being able or not being confident enough to speak were deeply rooted in fears like being rejected or being judged or being told off, which would mean I was imperfect. And I had a real need to be perfect and well put together and well liked that created so many issues like this for me. My voice and not being able to speak up was a downstream effect of a lot of these conditionings and beliefs that I held about myself and the world around me. And at that age, I didn't know what was going on. I just knew that all I had was fear, which then created this paralysis. As a medium now and someone who's deeply entrenched in the ways of the quantum and spirituality, I know that many of these conditionings and beliefs came from well beyond this lifetime. There's a lot of things that happened in my current lifetime that, yes, did contribute to it. But there were many things that came through from past lifetimes, from ancestral lines that came in and made this matrix of complexity that resulted in me not being able to speak up. And this density of these fears was just bound up and knotted in my little body and just resulted in me being terrified all the time around my voice and who I was. This low base meant that when I went through other significant periods or experiences in my life, my voice just got buried even more and more under different layers of fears and beliefs that I had about myself. I had such a difficult time during my primary and secondary school years, even into university, that, I just stopped speaking up and I didn't speak out. And even although I held many jobs in the marketing and sales sector around this time, particularly around the university period that required me to deliver keynote speeches or presentations, like it was a big deal and really, really difficult for me. And I find it really interesting that when I've spoken to family members and friends about this battle that I had for such a long time around speaking with confidence, so many people that I've spoken to have reacted to say that it seems so bizarre because I did have this ability to project an air of confidence. And yes, I have to agree, I got very good at projecting confidence and seeming really powerful on stage. However, the anxiety and the amount of effort that I had to put into preparing and over preparing and making sure everything was perfect was exhausting. And inside, I was a mess. Honestly, I was faking it until you're making it, but if I'm really honest, I was not quite making it. And that had a significant impact on my self-esteem and how I saw myself. And it attributed to things like eating disorders, body dysmorphia, social isolation, staying in abusive relationships way too long because I just felt like I had no value. I didn't like who I was. So, of course, it was impossible to own that and love that. And so I kind of just floated and bounced and really was driven by fear. And, I even lost about 5 years, probably longer, but I lost 5 very significant years of my life to a really severe depression, like can't get out of bed level of depression and despair. This feeling of not being worthy of anything or not feeling like there was any point showing up and expressing and exploring things because there was just so much despair under there. It's all connected to not loving, owning who I was, standing in my power, realizing that just as I was and who I was enough and did have a significant role to play in the world by just being me and liberating myself from all of these fears to find this beautiful voice that does exist, this passion for helping others, this want to be in the world and make a difference. At that time, I couldn't see it. It was buried under such heavy, heavy despair and sadness and conditioning that had come from so many different energetic facets. And so, of course, I had to make a change. Like I had to draw a line in the sand and set the really powerful intention to myself that like enough was enough. I didn't want to be this way anymore. I wanted to find a way to love myself, to love my life, to be someone who was confident because in amongst all of this, I was quite academic, but I also had a real passion for the creative arts. Like in high school, you laugh, but in high school, I wanted to be Miss Spielberg. Like I was the person that would run around with the camera and was writing scripts and, was indulging in these creative pursuits. And when I look back at it now, I can see that, yes, I had the creative streak, but for me particularly, and this doesn't apply to everyone in filmmaking, but being behind the camera was still a degree of hiding. Like it was the upper limit of my comfort to really put myself out there. But being in plays, being in movies, creating these stories, this underlying current of storytelling, like it had been there for me for such a long time. I was even writing stories when I was really young, and I had this beautiful best friend through primary school. She and I used to raid costume boxes and find these little costumes and then go around and put on plays. And we loved it. We'd choreograph dances and little performances. But I distinctly remember by the time we got to grades 5, I would say, which is probably around that age of 10, putting yourselves out there in that way, you are open to ridicule and kids can be really cruel. Like, I've never really loved school from a perspective of bullying. That's another big part of my story. And I think these combination of experiences of bullying, that being terrified, and then trying to put myself out there creatively and then getting humiliated in terms of kids laughing, I internalized a lot of this. So wanting to be Miss Spielberg was me trying to have a voice and telling stories, but from a kind of protected or sheltered perspective. And so all of these things compounded to get into my early 20s and have this severe depression. I knew that I had to make a change. And so I really powerfully and passionately drew a line in the sand and said, enough. Like, I feel so broken and I don't want to be here anymore. Like, I need to start lifting myself up. This is a line in the sand. And being the type of person that I am an all in. And so I said to myself, no matter what it takes, no matter how hard it is, I'm going to pull myself out of this. Like, I am going to rebuild myself. I'm going to find myself. And that spurred me on to make decisions like seeking out, in the early days, counselors, and then delving into the energetics of things like EFT and tapping and lots of different metaphysical modalities as well, and healing, kinesiology, everything that I could get my hand on to start really unpacking what it is that I was dealing with, what all this fear was, and start to recode that and doing all of that work. And it took me all around the world. I've worked both locally here in Australia. I've traveled over to the States to work with incredible energy workers and shamans and leaders of different modalities. I've traveled to India to work with gurus in really intensive settings to kind of tip all of this out and do body work and do energetic work. I've worked with sexual-based energy healers as well to try and unlock all of that stuff that was stored in my body that was really holding and suppressing my voice and my confidence and my power down, to really unpack and break out of all of that old stuff. I just didn't want to hold that in my body anymore. And there was so many ambitious things that I wanted to achieve. I wanted to take my creativity to the next level, but instead of being behind the camera, because I knew for me, that was a sense of hiding, I wanted to be on stage. I wanted to be confident to show up on social media, to lead movements and change that makes a difference. But it was a hard journey. Like, there were moments where I wanted to give up, and I did give up. I did. In full transparency, there were moments I was like, no, I can't do this. It's too much. I can't do this. It's too heavy. I'm just feeling so broken. I would go back in and I would retreat and I'd go back into relationships that were bad for me. I'd change who I was. I'd give away all of my power, my confidence, and my voice, which is the worst thing that I could have done when you give your voice away to someone else. And so I'd have these moments where I'd go back, I'd fall back. But there was always something in me. And if you're listening, you might recognize this. There's always this little thing, this little voice, this little twinge, something in you that's like, I'm not going to give up. Like, I know I gave up. I put my hands up. I surrendered in this moment. But you know what? I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to find the next thing that's going to help me, the next book, the next person, the next coach, the next thing that the universe presents to you or piques your interest. And you're like, oh, there's a reason. And for me, one of those things that the universe kind of wrangled in my path is my mom and I went to a random free seminar about body language and presenting. And at this point, I was in careers where I was doing a lot of presenting. And this little mini day seminar about body language and stage presence came up, and my mom and I went along. And at the end of this workshop, they pitched this 3-day intensive speakers bootcamp, right? And it was like putting you in a pressure cooker to not only teach you and train you on effective stagecraft and speaking, but really bringing in all of those story showing elements so that you could become that next level of keynote speaker on the stage. And I honestly was terrified. My mom, she's amazing. And I'm going to have her on the podcast at some point to tell her story because she's got a really powerful story. But she heard the woman speak and was straight up the back of the room and signed up. And I was sitting in the audience thinking, who am I to do this? Why would I even sign up to this? How am I going to pay for it? What would my fiance at the time say? Like, he was not a big fan of investing in personal development because he didn't see the value in it. And I had allowed him to imprint that belief on me. So I was sitting there. And then my mum comes back from the back of the room after signing herself up and sits down. She's like, don't be angry, but I've signed you up as well. I remember exploding. I was like, what? What have you done? Like, I can't, all of the reasons pouring out of me. I can't afford it. What's my fiance going to say? Like, I'm going to be in so much trouble, blah, 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 blah. Like, all of the fear and the conditioning just pouring out. And she's like, just trust me. Like, just trust me. It's going to change your life. Like, I've just got a feeling. And so begrudgingly, and here's the thing, like, she signed me up, but I still had to pay for it. So I begrudgingly went up to the back of the room and handed over my credit card. And honestly, it was the best thing that I did because it opened the door, like setting that intention and being willing to be stretched so far out of my comfort zone to do that was the best thing that I could have done. And the event itself, the boot camp itself, wasn't for, a month or two later. So I had to go home and bridge the subject with my fiance at the time and tell him that this is what I was going to do and, went through the wrath of all of that. And Mum and I went, and it was an incredible experience, both from really triggering the depths of fear and questioning who you are, because this boot camp was set so intensively. Like, it moved quickly, it threw you on stage straight away. There were video cameras, they were videoing, doing professional headshots. Like, it was the whole thing. It was a pressure cooker. And I remember for the first couple of days, like, just struggling, battling, struggling. You'd have a moment where you deliver something right, but then your head would come in and say, that's not good enough. Like, who are you? And the very last night was a Saturday night. Class ran until like 9 or 10 p.m. at night. And then we had to go home and write these, I think they were 4-minute keynote, like high-level keynote speeches to come back and deliver in front of the broadcast crew and an audience and everything the next morning. And so with class finishing at 10 p.m., like, it was a late night of like writing and practicing. And Mum and I had hired a little Airbnb. It was adorable. And so we had this beautiful little space where we were working on our things. And I just felt all of that old conditioning. I just felt so broken. And I wrote this thing. I practiced it. I couldn't get it to land because I was also dealing with that perfectionism streak as well. And when you've got perfectionism on board, because I hadn't quite healed that to this point, it makes you question everything. And so nothing was lining up to this incredibly high benchmark that I had set for myself, that I vowed that I couldn't do it. I quit. I went to bed. I was like, I'm sorry, Mum, I've let you down. Like, I can't do this. I'll let them know in the morning that I'm going to step out of like doing the final presentation. And this is just who I am and how I am. And I'm just residing to the fact that this is me. And I'm never going to be confident enough to tell my story or to be a powerful presence on stage. Like, it's just not for me. Like, I'm just not built this way, essentially. And so I left Mum, who was working in the living room, and went to bed, basically cried myself to sleep. But in the next morning, I woke up. Mum, she had her speech. She was working through her own conditioning. We went down to the early morning start of the last day of the boot camp. And I went up to the organizer and just explained. He was a lovely man. And just said, look, I can't do this. Like, I can't do it. I'm feeling all these things. It's not good enough. Like, essentially just a real terrified, old patterned response. And he was like, that's fine. We're never going to force you to do anything. And he looked at me and he said, and I've never forgotten this, he said, you are capable of more than what your brain is telling you can do. I sat there and I thought about it. There was something true that hit home, because I knew on an energetic level, there was something about expression and storytelling and being confident that was really familiar. It was that distant echo of, I know I've done this before, whether it's in a past life, whether it was from different experiences in different contexts. There is an energetic memory here of actually being a confident storyteller. And so I sat in that energy, and the first few people came up and they did their presentations, and they, we were in a boot camp. So they weren't perfect and polished, but they resonated. And they hit. And so I sat there and I got this really clear, intuitive hit to say, you need to write your speech right here, right now, based on exactly what you're feeling. Drop the pretense and the sales pitch and all the other things that you were going to get out there and talk about. Just drop all those subjects and all of those topics and just write about this moment and this feeling. So that's what I did. There was speaker after speaker on the stage, and I just sat there and I just wrote and wrote and wrote on these cards. And then at the very end, they said, is there anyone else who wants to come up who perhaps was thinking of sitting out today? And I raised my hand. And somehow between writing it, it had sunk deep enough into my psyche and into my bones that I went up there, I popped the cards on the side, and I delivered this amazing keynote presentation and I had a standing ovation. Like it was, I can feel the emotion coming up as I tell you this story. Like it was an incredible turning point in my life to be able to show myself that no matter how dark things felt and no matter how insignificant I thought I was or that my story was, it could have a profound impact on others, on myself. It was a moment of transformation for me as well. And so from that day onward, I became obsessed. I started taking every course on voice, on expression, on confidence, on channeling, on all the different modalities. And I just studied like a fiend. Like I learned everything that I could and made a really powerful decision to actually make this my life's work. And so this became my world. I quit my corporate job in 2021 to start a coaching business on a massive leap of faith. And I launched a podcast called Life in Contradiction. I launched Body Diaries to now being an actor and performer of all things, honestly, of all things. To go from that anxiety to now being on stages is honestly so profound, even to me. Still, I look back on it and I'm like, how did this happen? I am so proud of myself in navigating all that I did to get here. And I can tell you that it brings me so much joy now, like not just from the work that I do, but for how I see myself. No matter what's going on, the chaos around me, the day-to-day difficulties that we all face, I can look in the mirror and be like, it was worth it. I love you. This work is important. And it's all because I drew that line in the sand and said, enough. Now is the time where I decide that I'm worth something and that my voice is worth sharing. And so if you're listening thinking, I could never do that, I could never have the confidence to speak up and share my story, let me tell you, you 100% can. Trust me, there are so many powerful ways that you can navigate all of the energetics that you've got on board, all the beliefs, the conditioning that exists within your body, within your soul. You can shed those. And this podcast is going to dive into a lot of these. I'm going to be sharing lots of different moments from my lifetime and the depths of despair that I felt, but all of the different modalities, techniques, tools, realizations that I came to, and sharing these with you so that you can start to, if they feel aligned with you, really shift out of these old modes and ways of being so that you can really own who you are. So if you have any questions or there's anything that you're still moving through when it comes to your confidence, connect with me on Instagram at andi.matthies and let me know. What kinds of things do you want to know about boldness and stepping into this? What is it that you dream of doing? And what's standing in the way of you doing that so that we can tackle these topics together and really get you out there feeling confident and really create this incredible life that you want. So make sure you stay in touch with me. Drop me your questions. What is on the other side of this is so worth it. And I cannot wait to go on this journey with you. Thank you so much for tuning in to today's episode. If you want to check out all of the behind the scenes content for this podcast, make sure you subscribe to my Substack channel, The Becoming Archive. You'll also be able to find me on Threads and Instagram at andi.matthies. Make sure you're connected and stay up to date with what's coming. If you're not in there yet and you want to get into the private Telegram space where all of these audios drop every day, as well as all the art, the conversation, and the behind the scenes, go to www.andrealeemathies.com/private podcast. You can also follow me on Instagram at Andrea Lee Matthies, and you can find more about me and all of my work at andrealeemathies.com. I'll see you in the next transmission.